My sister shut the door in my face on Christmas Eve, telling me I wasn't immediate family. When they called days later asking for the mortgage payment, I just laughed. They had forgotten one crucial detail. I owned the house they lived in. So, I sold it. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The windshield wipers slapped a frantic, useless rhythm against the freezing rain. Ice caked the edges of the glass, and my knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I was already running a low-grade fever, the kind that makes your skin feel too tight and your bones ache, but I'd pushed it down. It was Christmas Eve. Nothing was going to stop me from surprising my family. For the past 2 hours, I'd been crawling along the interstate in this miserable weather, the trunk of my car packed with gifts. There was a high-end espresso machine for my parents, Bruce and Margaret, and a designer handbag for my sister, Serafina. Even her new fiancé, Craig, whom I'd only met twice, had a ridiculously expensive bottle of scotch waiting for him. I prided myself on my gift-giving, on being the one who could provide, the one who took care of everyone. I finally turned onto their street. The house, the one I had bought for them 5 years ago, looked like a postcard. Warm light spilled from the windows, a perfect tree visible in the living room. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. I was here. I was safe. I parked, grabbed the 2 largest bags of gifts, and staggered up the icy walkway, my head pounding from the fever and the drive. I didn't bother with my key, wanting the full surprise effect. I rang the doorbell, a happy, familiar chime. Seconds later, the door opened, but only halfway, blocked by a body. It was my sister, Serafina. She was wearing a new velvet dress, her hair and makeup perfect. "Tessa," she said. Her voice was high and tight, her eyes wide with something that wasn't pleasure. It was panic. "Merry Christmas," I tried to boom, but my voice came out as a hoarse croak. I leaned forward, expecting her to swing the door open and pull me into a hug. Instead, she put a hand flat on the door, blocking my view. "Oh my God, Tessa, what are you doing here?" My smile faltered. "What do you mean? I'm here for Christmas. Surprise!" I hefted the bags, which were suddenly very heavy. Behind her, I could hear laughter, the clink of glasses, and a man's voice. Craig's telling a story. Serafina glanced over her shoulder, her face flushed. "Tessa, you should have called." "Called? Why? I wanted to surprise you," I said, confusion turning to a cold dread that had nothing to do with the sleet soaking my coat. She winced, refusing to meet my eyes. We're kinda doing immediate family only this year, Tess. It's just me and Craig and Mom and Dad, keeping it small." The words hung in the air, nonsensical. "Immediate family?" I repeated, my voice hollow. "Sira, I'm immediate family." "Well, you know what I mean," she said, her tone shifting from panic to defensive. "It's just, Craig is here now and we're starting our own traditions. It's just easier this way. We were going to call you tomorrow." You were going to call me tomorrow," I echoed. I looked down at the gifts in my hands, the ribbons already damp and drooping. I could feel the fever spiking, a hot, woolly blanket wrapping around my brain. I looked past her, trying to see my parents. "Are Mom and Dad, do they know you're doing this?" They understand, Tessa. It's not a big deal. We'll see you at New Year's or something, okay?" She started to push the door closed. "You look sick. You should probably get home and rest." "But the gifts," I stammered, holding them out uselessly. "Just leave them on the porch," she said, her voice muffled as the door clicked shut. The deadbolt slid home with a heavy, final thunk. I stood there for a full minute, the freezing rain plastering my hair to my skull. I was outside, in the cold. My family was inside, warm and laughing, celebrating Christmas without me. I, the daughter who had bought this very house, was not immediate family. I didn't cry. I was too stunned, too sick. A strange, icy calm settled over me. I turned around, walked back to my car, and placed the gifts gently on the passenger seat. I got in, turned the key, and backed out of the driveway. I didn't look back. The 2-hour drive home was a blur of headlights, ice, and a single, searing thought that burned brighter than my fever. The betrayal was worse than any illness. The next 48 hours were a feverish nightmare. I made it back to my apartment, stripped off my wet clothes, and collapsed into bed. My low-grade fever had become a full-blown inf. Payback for the icy drive and the even icier rejection. I was completely alone for Christmas Day. I turned off my phone, unable to bear the thought of seeing a Merry Christmas text from any of them, knowing it would be a lie. I lay in the dark, drifting in and out of a restless sleep, the image of the closing door playing on a loop in my mind. By the morning of the 27th, the fever had broken, leaving me weak but clear-headed. The apartment was silent, the unopened gifts sitting on my dining table like a pile of accusations. The hurt was still there, a raw, physical ache in my chest, but something else was solidifying beneath it, a cold, hard anger. I turned my phone back on. It lit up with a few predictable messages. One from my mother, Margaret, sent on Christmas morning, "Merry Christmas, sweetie. Sorry you couldn't make it. Give us a call." Sorry I couldn't make it. The lie was so casual it took my breath away. They hadn't even given me the dignity of the truth. They just pretended I'd chosen not to come. There was nothing from Serafina. I sat at my kitchen counter, clutching a mug of tea, and forced myself to think. This wasn't Serafina. Not really. My sister was flighty and a bit selfish, sure, but she wasn't cruel. This had Craig written all over it. Craig, the lifestyle entrepreneur who had materialized 6 months ago and had ever since been whispering in her ear. I thought about his slick, polished appearance, the way he never answered a direct question about his ventures, and the unsettling interest he'd shown in my job as a financial analyst. He'd asked probing questions about my investments, my salary, and most specifically, the arrangement with my parents' house. "It's so generous of you, Tessa," he'd said at Thanksgiving, his eyes a little too bright. "Just a gift, no strings." "They're my parents, Craig. I wanted them to be secure in their retirement," I'd replied, feeling defensive. Of course. A wonderful gesture," he'd mused, swirling his wine. "A very significant asset." The memory made my skin crawl. He saw my family not as people, but as assets, and he saw me as a barrier. The thought kept circling back, a cold, hard little pebble of a thought. They had all, my parents included, chosen to push me out. They had made a calculation, and in doing so, they had forgotten one crucial, fundamental thing. They had forgotten that I wasn't just a benefactor. I was an analyst. I deal in numbers, in contracts, in the hard, unblinking reality of black and white print. And they had forgotten that the house they were so comfortable in, the one they'd shut me out of, wasn't a gift in the way they'd come to believe. It was a property, and I was the sole name on the deed. My phone rang, buzzing loudly on the granite countertop. It was my mother. I stared at it, my heart hammering. I picked up, my voice flat. "Hello, Mom." "Tessa, there you are. We were so worried, honey. Are you feeling better?" Her voice was breezy, full of a false, chirpy concern that made my stomach clench. "I'm fine, Mom. What do you need?" "Oh, well, it's just..." She gave a nervous little laugh. "You know, with the holidays and all, things get so mixed up. Your father and I were just looking at the calendar and, well, the mortgage payment is due on the 1st. We were just wondering if you'd, taken care of it, with you being sick and all." There it was, not "Tessa, we are so sorry." Not "Serafina told us what happened and it's unforgivable." Not even "Are you okay?" It was just "Where is the money?" I looked at the pile of gifts, at the designer bag for Serafina, at the espresso machine for them, and a laugh, a dry, humorless bark, escaped my lips. "The mortgage," I said, the words tasting like ash. "That's why you called." "Well, yes, dear. You know your father worries." "Mom," I interrupted, my voice as cold and clear as the ice on my windshield. "The house is in my name. The mortgage is my responsibility. I am very aware of when the payment is due." "Oh," she said, flustered. Good, that's all we needed, so you'll handle it." Oh, yes, I said, a sudden, sharp clarity cutting through the last of my emotional fog. I'm going to handle it. I have to go, Mom. I have some calls to make. I hung up before she could reply. They had forgotten who I was. They had forgotten what I was capable of. They thought I was just a walking, talking bank account, an endless supply of generosity they could turn off and on at their convenience. They had forgotten that generosity is a choice. And they had forgotten one crucial thing. I was the one holding all the cards. My parents, Bruce and Margaret, hadn't always been this way. My father, Bruce, was a retired electrician, a man who had worked with his hands his entire life, and my mother, Margaret, had been a beloved kindergarten teacher. They were simple, good people who had given me a N.D. Serafina a stable, if modest, upbringing. I was the responsible one, the one who excelled in school, who got the scholarships, who climbed the corporate ladder. Serafina was the creative one, the free spirit, which in adult life had translated to a string of part-time jobs and a reliance on our parents, and by extension, me. 5 years ago, a bad investment had wiped out most of my parents' retirement savings. My father, proud and broken, was facing the reality of having to sell their childhood home. I was a senior analyst by then, and I couldn't stand to see them in such distress. So, I stepped in. I sold my downtown condo, bought that beautiful house on the quieter, tree-lined street, and put it in my name. I told them it was their home for as long as they lived. They could live rent-free. I would cover the mortgage and the taxes as my gift to them. It felt good to finally be able to care for them as they had cared for me. My mistake, I now realized, was in making it too easy. My generosity had become an expectation. My presence had become a utility. And then, 6 months ago, Craig had arrived. Serafina had met him at some wellness retreat. He called himself a lifestyle entrepreneur and a growth consultant. His Instagram was a curated feed of him stepping out of rented sports cars, holding meetings on yachts, and using meaningless phrases like synergizing potential and actualizing a growth mindset. To me, he screamed con artist. But Serafina, who had always craved a life of glamour, was smitten. And my parents, desperate to see their youngest daughter finally settle down, were blinded by his polished veneer. The first time I met him, at that Thanksgiving dinner, his focus on me was unnerving. He wasn't interested in me as a person, but as a financial entity. "Tessa, a senior analyst," he'd said, fixing me with his intense, unblinking stare. "You must handle some very high-stakes portfolios. Very impressive." "It's a job, Craig," I'd said dismissively. No, I'm fascinated by people who understand the true flow of capital," he'd continued, leaning in. "Serafina tells me you basically gifted your parents their house. That's incredible, but from a tax perspective, isn't that a bit messy? Having it in your name, I mean, you're absorbing all the liability. You should really consider transferring the deed to them, or, better yet, put it in a trust. I actually specialize in asset protection." "I'm fine with the arrangement, Craig." I'd cut him off, a warning bell ringing in my head. "Of course," he'd said, smiling, but his eyes were cold. "Just looking out for the family." Now his behavior made perfect, sickening sense. He wasn't just a grifter, he was a parasite, and he'd identified me as the host of the family's finances. To get what he wanted, the house, my parents' dependency, Serafina's inheritance, he had to get rid of me. The Christmas Eve lockout wasn't just a spontaneous act of cruelty from my sister, it was a calculated move. It was phase 1 of his plan: isolate the target. He probably assumed I'd be so emotionally devastated that I'd retreat, making it easier for him to spin his narrative. He would tell my parents I was unstable, that I was the one who had abandoned them. He would position himself and Serafina as the new, stable caretakers. And in their vulnerability, my parents would agree to anything, including pressing me to transfer the house. The phone call from my mother proved it. They weren't even thinking about me, they were thinking about the payment. Craig had them worried about their security, and he was the only one there offering them a solution. A cold fury settled over me. He had underestimated me. He thought I was just an emotional, dutiful daughter. He'd forgotten that my job, my entire career, was built on one principle: risk analysis. I spend my days identifying liabilities and neutralizing them. And Craig had just identified himself as the biggest liability in my life. I sat down at my desk, my mind finally, completely, painfully clear. The fever was gone, and so was the heartbroken woman who had cried in her car. In her place was Tessa, the senior financial analyst, and she was ready to get to work. My shift from victim to strategist was as sudden and decisive as a circuit breaker flipping. The emotional pain was still there, a low-voltage hum beneath the surface, but my mind was all business. Craig wanted to play games with assets? Fine. I manage a 9-figure portfolio for my firm. He was an amateur. My first call wasn't to my family. It was to my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Julia. Julia, it's Tessa. I need to liquidate a property, the one on Maple Drive. There was a pause. Your parents' house? Julia asked, her voice carefully neutral. She knew the whole arrangement. Is everything all right? No, I said, my voice steady. But it will be. I need you to draw up a listing agreement with a top agent. T in their area. I also want you to pull every document related to that property. The deed, the mortgage agreement, the payment history. Everything. Consider it done, Julia said. What's the timeline? The timeline is yesterday, I replied. But that's not all. I need you to recommend a private investigator, the best one you know. This time, Julia's pause was longer. Tessa, what is going on? I have a new, unofficial brother-in-law to be named Craig. He calls himself a lifestyle entrepreneur. I want to know everything. Bankruptcies, liens, past relationships, any and all legal entanglements. I want to know where he gets his money and, more importantly, where he's hiding it. I have just the person, Julia said, her tone all business now. He's expensive, but he's a ghost. You'll have a report by the end of the week. My next call was to my bank. I paid the January 1st mortgage payment. It was crucial, I knew, to remain in perfect, legal standing as the owner. I would fulfill my obligations to the letter, right up until the moment I didn't. For the next 3 days, I was a machine. I worked my normal job from home, my fingers flying across the keyboard, running analyses and trading stocks. But in the evenings, my apartment became a war room. I did my own digging. Craig's social media was a facade, but a poorly constructed one. The yacht he was on belonged to a tech bro he'd tagged, who had no other photos of him. The meetings were all in publicly accessible hotel lobbies. He had no digital footprint before 2 years ago. Then the Pies report landed in my inbox. It was a masterpiece. Craig's real name wasn't even Craig. It was Christopher. He had 2 judgments against him in neighboring states for defrauding elderly investors in a wellness real estate scam. He would charm his way into families, identify a vulnerable member, usually an elderly person with property, and convince them to sign it over to an LLC he controlled, promising to manage it for them. Then he would drain the equity and disappear. He wasn't just a grifter, he was a predator. And his current target was my family. The report included a recent credit pull. He and Serafina had jointly applied for a business loan 3 weeks ago and had listed the Maple Drive house as their primary asset and address. He wasn't just trying to isolate me, he was actively trying to leverage my property. He must have been pressuring Serafina, promising her they could start their wellness brand if they could just get control of the house. And my sister, blinded by him and resentful of my success, had been an easy, willing accomplice. The Christmas Eve lockout now seemed so much darker. It was a power play, a demonstration to my parents of who was in charge. Tessa is out. We are in. Your security now depends on us. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The phone call from my mother asking for the mortgage payment. It wasn't just them being thoughtless. Craig had likely put them up to it. He wanted to see if I would rock the boat or if I would continue to pay, hurt, and compliant. My payment was confirmation for him that I was still playing by the old rules while he was writing new ones. I closed my laptop. My hands were perfectly steady. I had him. I had all of them. My phone buzzed. A text from Serafina. My first contact from her since the door closed. "Hey Tess, I know you're probably upset. Mom and Dad are really worried about the house and everything. We think it's time we all sat down and had a real family meeting to discuss the future. Craig has some great ideas." A family meeting? My blood ran cold. This was it. This was his move. He was going to try to get me to sign something. I typed back a reply, my words polite, professional, and deadly. "You're right. A meeting is an excellent idea. Let's do it at my lawyer's office on Friday at 10 a.m. It's time we put everything on the table." I hit send. The trap was set. They would walk in expecting a negotiation. They would be walking into an execution. The conference room at Julia's firm was on the 20th floor, with a sweeping view of the city that always made me feel powerful. I had arrived an hour early, laying out my documents with the precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. The original deed, the full mortgage statement, the PI report on Craig, bound in a neat black folder, and finally, the signed real estate listing agreement. When the receptionist buzzed to say my family had arrived, my heart gave a single, hard thump. I took a deep breath and centered myself. This wasn't a family reunion. It was a deposition. Julia led them in. My parents, Bruce and Margaret, looked nervous, avoiding my eyes. Serafina walked in with her chin high, a look of defiant self-righteousness on her face. And then came Craig, all smiles and expensive cologne, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. He looked like he owned the place. "Tessa," he said, extending a hand, his voice oozing false sincerity. "Thank you for putting this together. I know this is all a bit emotional, but I'm glad we can finally get practical and structure a future that works for everyone." I ignored his hand. "Please sit," I said, gesturing to the chairs across the massive mahogany table. Julia sat at my side, her face impassive. "So," Serafina began, pulling a stack of papers from her own designer bag, one I'd bought her last Christmas, I noted. "We're glad you're finally seeing reason, Tessa. Craig has been doing so much research, and we've realized how unfair this arrangement is to you." "Oh," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "All that liability," Craig jumped in, sliding his own papers across the table. "And the tax burden, it's just not smart. What we've drawn up here is a simple transfer. We've created an LLC that will hold the property. Serafina and I will be the managers, and of course your parents will be beneficiaries. It frees you, Tessa. It frees you from the burden, and it secures the asset for the family's future." I looked at the document. It was a quitclaim deed. He was trying to get me to sign away my house, just like that. "Secures the asset," I repeated. I looked at my parents. "Is this what you want? You want me to sign the house over to this LLC?" My father, Bruce, just stared at the table. But my mother spoke, her voice thin. "Tessa, dear, it makes sense. Craig is so good with these things, and, well, Serafina is family. It's time she had some responsibility, some equity." Equity, the word hung in the air. "I see," I said. I picked up the PI's report. "Craig, you've been very busy, but I've been busy too. I also did some research." His smile tightened. "I don't know what you mean." "I mean Christopher," I said. The color drained from his face. Serafina looked at him, confused. "What? Who's Christopher?" "Ask him," I said. I slid the report across the table. "Ask him about the 2 civil judgments against him in Oregon for real estate fraud. Ask him about the wellness scam he pulled on an 80-year-old woman in Portland. Ask him why he changed his name." Serafina's hand flew to her mouth. Craig's eyes darted from me to the folder, his composure cracking. "This is slander. It's inadmissible. What is this?" "That," I said, "is a $10,000 private investigation into your entire pathetic, fraudulent life. It includes your real social security number, your past addresses, and a very detailed account of how you prey on vulnerable families, charm your way in, and steal their assets." "Serafina, don't listen to her," Craig hissed, his voice losing its polish. "She's trying to divide us. She's always been jealous of you." "Jealous?" I laughed, the sound brittle. "Jealous of what? Your new fiancé, who was planning to steal my house, the house I bought for our parents, and leave you all with nothing. Is that what you think this is?" I turned to my parents. "And you let this happen. You shut me out in the cold. You let your daughter, your other daughter, tell me I wasn't immediate family." My mother finally broke, her face crumpling. "Tessa, we didn't. Serafina said you were. You were busy." "Busy? I was on your doorstep, Mom, in the freezing rain, with gifts." My voice cracked, but I held it steady. "And not one of you called to apologize. You just called to ask for the mortgage payment. Because he," I pointed a shaking finger at Craig, "told you to. He wanted to see if the bank account was still open." You can't prove any of that." Craig slammed his hand on the table. "You're just a bitter, lonely woman who's trying to ruin my life." "Ruin your life, Christopher?" I said. "You don't have a life, you have a series of targets." I leaned forward. "And you made a very, very big mistake when you targeted my family. You thought I was weak. You thought I was just an emotional woman you could push aside." I picked up the last document, the listing agreement. "You wanted to talk about the future of the house," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Let's. This is a listing agreement. I've retained the top producing agent in their neighborhood. The for sale sign goes up this afternoon." The silence in the room was absolute, heavier and more suffocating than any argument. Serafina looked like she'd been struck, her gaze flickering between the listing agreement and Craig's pale, sweating face. My parents just looked old, shrunken by the revelation. "Sold," my father Bruce whispered, his voice hoarse. "Tessa, you can't, it's our home." "No, Dad," I said, my voice firm but laced with the exhaustion of my long-held patience. "It's my house. It has always been my house. You were just living in it. And I was happy to provide that until you decided I wasn't worthy of walking through the front door." Craig, seeing his entire plan disintegrate, went on the offensive. It was a desperate, sloppy maneuver. "You're bluffing," he sneered, trying to regain his composure. "You won't do it, you're too nice. You'd never make your own parents homeless. This is just a pathetic attempt to scare us." He turned to Serafina, grabbing her arm. "She's trying to control us, Sira. Don't you see? This is what she's always done. She holds this house over your heads to make you do what she wants." For a second, I saw my sister waver. This was the narrative Craig had been feeding her for months, that I wasn't generous, I was controlling, that my help wasn't a gift, it was a weapon. She had wanted to believe him because it absolved her of her own jealousy and failures. "Is that what you think, Serafina?" I asked, meeting her gaze. "Do you think I bought this house to control you?" You always looked down on me," she burst out, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and fear. "You with your big job and your money, you think you're so much better than us. Craig respects me. He sees my potential." "He sees a free place to live," I countered, "and an easy mark. He doesn't respect you, Sira. He's using you to get to my assets." "Lies," Craig shouted. "You have no proof." "Actually," my lawyer Julia spoke for the first time, her voice cutting through the hysteria. "We do." She slid a second file across the table, this one addressed to Craig. "That is a cease and desist letter, ordering you to have no further contact with my client or her family. It also contains copies of the joint business loan application you and Ms. Serafina filed, listing a property you do not own as collateral. That is attempted wire fraud and bank fraud." Julia's gaze shifted to me, "And Tessa, I have more." She turned on a small speakerphone in the center of the table. "Mr. Harris, are you on the line?" "I am," a new voice said, older and weary. "Craig or Christopher, whichever you prefer," Julia said. "I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Alan Harris. Of Portland, Oregon. He was the sole proprietor of a small real estate firm before he met you and you helped him restructure it into an LLC." Craig froze. He told me he was restructuring my assets for my retirement," Mr. Harris's voice crackled over the speaker. "He said he was a friend. He took my daughter, who was struggling at the time, under his wing. Promised her the world. By the time I realized what was happening, he had leveraged my properties to the hilt and vanished. I lost everything. My business, my home, my daughter's trust. He destroyed my family. Serafina let out a small, strangled sob. She ripped her arm out of Craig's grasp. You told me your last partner was crazy. You told me she. He lied, Serafina, I said softly. He lied about everything. All the fight drained out of Craig. He was a cornered animal. His mask of sophistication was gone, replaced by a cheap, sullen anger. So what? You're going to call the cops? They won't do anything. It's a civil matter. You're right, I said. The police can't do much about your past, but Mr. Harris is already working with the state attorney general. And I tapped the file from Julia, am more than happy to provide them with this new evidence of your attempted fraud in the state. You won't just be sued, Christopher. You'll be prosecuted. Craig looked at me, his eyes full of pure, unadulterated hate. Then, without a word, he grabbed his briefcase and walked out of the room. He didn't look back at Serafina. He didn't say goodbye. He just ran. The door clicked shut, leaving a devastating silence in its wake. Serafina stood there, completely broken. She slowly sank into a chair and, for the first time, looked at me with eyes that weren't full of resentment, but of a dawning, horrifying clarity. She finally understood what she had done. My parents were staring at the listing agreement as if it were a death warrant. 30 days, I said, my voice void of all emotion. The agent will be in touch to schedule viewings. I expect you to be cooperative. The days that followed were a blur of logistics. The for sale sign went up on the lawn of the Maple Drive house, a stark, fluorescent orange symbol of the new reality. The agent I'd hired was ruthless and efficient. She priced the house to sell, and in the current market, it was a feeding frenzy. My family, in their shock, had become ghosts. My parents left a few rambling, panicked voicemails. My father tried anger, "You can't do this to your mother?" And my mother tried guilt, "After all we've done for you?" I didn't answer. I let Julia handle all communication. Serafina, on the other hand, was silent. She had, as the saying goes, gone to ground. I assumed she was in her room, processing the dual shock of losing her fiancé and her home in the same hour. The public showdown didn't happen at a party or a holiday. It happened on a gray, drizzly Tuesday, 2 weeks before the house was set to close. I had to go to TH. House to sign some final papers for the title company and do a last walkthrough with the agent. I had arranged a time when I knew my parents would be at a doctor's appointment, or so I thought. When I pulled up, Serafina's little car was in the driveway, and so was my parents' sedan. They were all there, waiting for me. My stomach twisted. I hadn't spoken to them directly since the lawyer's office. I took a breath, grabbed my briefcase, and walked up the path I had once walked with armfuls of Christmas gifts. I used my key. The lock turning felt loud in the stillness. They were all sitting in the living room, surrounded by half-packed boxes. It was a miserable, defeated scene. My mother was crying quietly into a tissue. My father was staring at the blank television. Serafina was sitting on the floor, her back against the wall, her knees drawn to her chest. "Tessa," my father said, standing up. He looked 10 years older. "We need to talk. You have to stop this." "There's nothing to talk about, Dad. The house is sold. The new owners close in 14 days. You have to be out by the 30th. I tried to keep my voice flat, professional. "Tessa, please," my mother cried. "This is our home. We have nowhere to go. You're throwing your own family out on the street." "You threw me out first, Mom," I said, the words sharper than I intended. "On Christmas Eve, in the freezing rain. Or did you forget that part already?" "It was a mistake," she sobbed. "Serafina was. Craig had her so confused. We were confused, we didn't mean it." "It wasn't a mistake, Mom. It was a choice. You all made a choice. You chose to believe a con man over me. You chose to see me as a bank, not a daughter. And when you shut that door, you shut it for good." "So that's it," my father said, his voice rising in disbelief. A lifetime of being your parents, raising you, loving you, and you just throw it all away because your sister was rude, because you got your feelings hurt. The minimization, the complete refusal to understand the depth of the betrayal, snapped the last thread of my composure. "My feelings?" I said, my voice dangerously low. "This isn't about my feelings. This is about you allowing a predator into your home. This is about you passively participating in a plan to defraud me. This is about you calling me, not to apologize for treating me like a stranger, but to ask me for money." I threw my briefcase on the coffee table. I worked my entire life to get where I am. I bought this house, so you would be safe. I sacrificed my own financial goals, my own downtown condo, my own investments to give you security. And in return, you treated me like an inconvenient ATM. You stood by and watched while my sister and her parasitic boyfriend told me I wasn't immediate family. I turned to Serafina. She hadn't moved, just watched me with wide, hollow eyes. "And you," I said. "He was a con man, Sira, but you were just cruel, you were jealous. You've always been jealous that I was successful and you weren't. You were so desperate to feel powerful for once that you were willing to destroy my relationship with our parents and steal my property to do it. You weren't just manipulated, Serafina. You were an accomplice." Serafina flinched as if I'd slapped her. She finally stood up, her body trembling. "You're right," she whispered. My parents and I both stopped, stunned into silence. "You're right," she repeated, her voice stronger. She was crying, but they weren't the crocodile tears I was used to. They were deep, racking sobs. I was jealous. I hated that you were so perfect. I hated that you could just buy them a house. I hated that they always needed you and they just put up with me, and Craig, he saw that. He told me I was the one with the real talent, the real vision. He said you were holding me back. He said you owed us this." She walked over to our parents. "And you," she said, her voice raw. You let him whisper in your ear too. You let him convince you that Tessa was the difficult one because she asked questions. You were so happy to have someone else around, someone who didn't make you feel like a charity case, that you were willing to believe him. You were willing to throw your other daughter away." It was the most honest, painful thing I had ever heard her say. She turned back to me, her face a mess of tears and self-loathing. "I'm so sorry, Tessa. I'm so sorry. I know you'll never forgive me. I don't deserve it. But you're right. I did this. I helped him." This was the moment, the final, terrible realization. The public humiliation wasn't about Craig. He was already gone. It was about this. My family, standing in the ruins of the life I had built for them, finally understanding the consequence of their actions. My father sat down, looking utterly defeated. My mother was weeping openly. Serafina made a move toward me, then stopped. "We'll be out, Tessa. I'll find a place for them. I'll get a real job. I'll fix this." She had finally broken free. She had finally taken responsibility. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I picked up my briefcase. "The house closes on the 30th, I said quietly. "Julia has the contact information for the movers I've paid for. They will be here on the 29th. I turned and walked out the front door, leaving them to sit among the boxes and the wreckage of their choices. The sale of the house closed without a hitch. The proceeds, a significant sum, were wired directly to my investment account. For the first time in 5 years, I was responsible only for myself. The silence that followed was both deafening and peaceful. I used the time and the sudden influx of cash to do what I did best. I restructured. I bought the downtown condo I had always wanted, a sleek, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows. I fully funded my own retirement accounts. I took a 2-week vacation to Italy, something I'd been putting off for years. I was, in essence, reinvesting in myself. As for my family, I kept my distance. The movers I hired, as promised, moved their belongings into a storage unit, which I paid for 3 months in advance. I found out through the grapevine that Craig, or Christopher, had been arrested. My PI report, combined with Mr. Harris's testimony and a new complaint from another family he'd swindled, was enough for the DA to build a strong case for serial fraud. His charm and slick suits wouldn't save him from a prison sentence. Justice, in that regard, was definitive. About 2 months after the closing, I received a letter. It was handwritten on simple, lined paper. It was from Serafina. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just reported. She told me she had 2 jobs now, one as a receptionist at a dental office and one waiting tables at night. She and my parents were living in a small 2-bedroom apartment complex across town. She was paying the rent. My parents, she wrote, were struggling. My father was having a hard time, his pride deeply wounded. My mother was quiet and sad. But Serafina wrote they were managing. The last line of the letter read, "I know I have no right to ask you for anything, not even to read this, but I just wanted you to know that I'm trying. And I am so sorry." It was the first true, unconditional apology I had ever received from her. I held that letter for a long time. The anger had faded, leaving behind a deep, lingering sadness. They were still my family. A week later, I acted. I didn't call them. I didn't go to their new apartment. I used my resources. I had Julia draft a new, ironclad legal document. I used a portion of the proceeds from the house sale to purchase a small, modest condo in a respectable retirement community. I put it in my parents' names, their names, not mine. It was theirs, free and clear. Theirs to live in, theirs to manage, theirs to pay the taxes and HOA fees on. I mailed the keys and the deed to my parents with a simple, 1-page letter. It said that this was the last gift. It was not a door back into my life, but a final act of a daughter fulfilling what she saw as her last duty. My financial support, I made clear, was over. Serafina, as she herself had stated, was now responsible for their day-to-day care. I was severing the financial ties that had nearly destroyed us. My relationship with them, if it was ever to be rebuilt, would have to be built on something other than money. I got a call from my dad a few days later. He was weeping. He just kept saying thank you over and over. My mother got on the phone and said, "We love you, Tessa. We're so proud of you." It was a start. I see Serafina for coffee sometimes. It's awkward. The chasm between us is vast, filled with the ghosts of Christmas Eve, but she's different. She's tired, but she's grounded. She talks about her work, about the challenges of budgeting for our parents' expenses. She has become, by necessity, the responsible one. I'm not sure our family will ever be what it was. The trust was too broken, the betrayal too deep. But the anger is gone. I sold the house, yes, but in doing so, I liberated all of us. I freed my parents from their dependency, I forced my sister to grow up, and I reclaimed my own life. I'm no longer the family bank. I'm just Tessa. And for the first time in a very long time, that is more than enough.